In this lecture, we're going to talk about the second half of Full Metal Jacket, and in particular those scenes where there's a film crew conducting interviews and trying to capture the authentic Vietnam War experience. So we're going to talk a little bit about those scenes in the film. And I'm suggesting that they fall within that category of metafiction that we've sort of talked about a little bit before. And I also want to talk about how the film makes a lot of references to westerns, like western type of movies, so cowboy kind of movies. So why are there so many references to cowboys and westerns and John Wayne and all those types of references that go back to a kind of American sort of type of interest in westerns and cowboys. So what does that have to do with Vietnam? And we'll also touch on we'll do a little bit more reading about Animal Mother's character as well. Okay, so that's what today's film lecture is all about. So there's a section of the film in part 2, or the second half of the film, where a film production or TV production crew comes and tries to sort of capture the men as they are in midst of battle and conducts interviews with the soldiers. So we have sort of the presence of a film crew within a film and filming a scene from the film. So it's very kind of confusing, and it's a little bit, playful in the way that we're watching a fiction and then we're watching a film crew filming a fictional scene from Vietnam. So I think Kubrick is doing something a little bit kind of playful, or drawing us to this idea that what we're watching is a recreation. It's not a factual documentary. This is a fictional portrayal of Vietnam, and these are actors, etc. So he's revealing his own filmmaker's process of sort of reconstructing the sort of Vietnam experience, and he's also sort of showing us how film crews would have documented Vietnam and sort of constructed these scenes for TV broadcasts and for news reels. So in a lot of ways, we get a kind of constructed fictional portrayal, or at least subjective portrayal of what is really going on when we watch the news or read about in the newspaper about what's going on overseas, or what happens during a war. We get a kind of filtered view through a lens, but it's still very much sort of contrived and orchestrated in terms of how it's directed by somebody. So someone's always behind the camera, pointing the lens and shaping what we see as the audience. So Kubrick is really kind of forcing us to contend with those issues in how we consume war as a kind of spectator, and we are sort of at the mercy of filmmakers and TV crews who capture that for us when we are not there ourselves. And then we have a kind of metafictional quality to that scene, or those scenes where there are sort of a TV crew interviewing the men, and it sort of forces us to sort of understand that a lot of what we see is just or what these men are saying is just for the camera. So they want to sort of portray themselves in a way that is often kind of contrived, or a performance, or part of their kind of facade of masculinity. So it's almost like they're actors playing the role. So there's elements of metafiction, and if we just read the definition here of metafiction, it might make a little bit more sense. But metafiction is a literary device whereby the author, in this case the film director, self-consciously draws attention to the work's status as a construct or artifact. Metafiction makes us aware that what we're reading or looking at is a fiction. So in that sense, Kubrick is kind of telling us or showing us how something like the news is constructed by this film crew, how what we see on TV is not always the reality, and also how he's also pointing out that his film itself is a fictional construct, that he is behind the camera filming another cameraman, filming his actors pretending to be Vietnam soldiers. So very kind of layered narrative there. And then you do have this interesting play on kind of American Westerns. So that tradition in American culture of the Western. Cowboy, the character of Cowboy, even his name sort of brings us or makes us consider the history in popular culture, American culture of Westerns, the kind of cowboys and Indians stories that these young men would have grown up watching on TV, the Lone Ranger, and of course John Wayne films. His role as kind of a cowboy figure is sort of a reference throughout the film. And in the scene where they're being filmed by the camera crew, Cowboy says, "Oh, we're filming Vietnam the movie," and then he casts each man in their role according to a sort of Western tradition. So the tradition of Western films, so the whole genre of Westerns. And Joker, of course, is cast as John Wayne, the sort of masculine archetype whose impression he always kind of uses whenever he wants to confront or ridicule that tough guy's pose. And then 8-Ball he says he's a horse, which kind of suggests, I don't know, possibly something about himself as like a tool or object of the war. Animal Mother is the rabid buffalo, which kind of goes with his name. He's animalistic in his approach to violence. He's rabid, meaning, he is wild, untamed, kind of crazy. Earl is General Custer, so he, as sort of platoon leader, places himself in that authority position. And then they refer to the Vietnamese. They use actually the slang or racial slur, gooks, in that scene, and then they acknowledge or they sort of make the comparison of the Vietnamese with Indians in traditional Westerns. So the cowboys and Indians, it's the Vietnamese who are cast in that role. So Kubrick is sort of making a parallel between how these soldiers view their roles as soldiers in Vietnam with how a traditional cowboy Western film would play out. So it's almost as if these young men see themselves as cowboys, like heroes, like John Wayne and cavalry coming in and bringing the law with them, settling the West, and sort of conquering the inhabitants of this place. So it's a very kind of Western frontier motif that's being used to depict how American culture is sort of out to conquer and rule and spread and show their influence, assert their power and dominance in a foreign land. So it's kind of a colonial narrative as well, and has definite connotations of racism and legacies of sort of violent dominance and oppression as well. So the American cowboy is sort of one of these archetypal characteristics that the soldiers want to sort of attain in their military service. You also get in these scenes sort of individual interviews with each of the members of the Lusthug Squad. Some of them are, more candid and more sort of honest than others. Some of the men just kind of spout off kind of war rhetoric, the propaganda that they've all sort of been taught, that, just comes almost like, the military jargon that they're just taught, and, they just spout it off without thinking about it. Joker has a kind of ironic, kind of subversive sense of humor in his answer. Some of the men sort of show contempt for Vietnamese people. They sort of suggest that they often respect the Viet Cong more than they do their allies in the South. So there's a lot of sort of contempt and confusion about how they actually view the real battle conflict versus how they sort of perceived of war prior to being in Vietnam. So Cowboy sort of talks about, having an idea of what war was, and then coming to Vietnam and having that sort of ideal or that perception sort of shattered and shook up. And they show that there's, sort of a respect for the enemy as well. That they acknowledge that these are, a tough opponent. And, I think there is some sense of discontent and maybe even foreboding about, not being able to win this battle. Some of them are a little bit more naive and just kind of spout off war propaganda. We have Rafterman, who he's sort of the newbie. He's hasn't been there very long, so he kind of just falls back into all that kind of propaganda speak, saying, Americans are the best. When you're in trouble, you call the killing machine. Blah, 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 right? So it's all very kind of this American, rah, rah, go team, kind of war talk. And then you have Earl, Crazy Earl, talking about, he doesn't know if the Americans should be involved in the war, but it's the place for him, so it's where he belongs. So he sort of identifies or sees himself and as, this is the place for him as a soldier. So he has defined his sense of identity, sense of self, his masculinity by being a soldier. So that's the only sort of sense of self that he recognizes. And then we get Joker's answer, which is a little, again, conflicted, speaks of his duality and the two sides of his character. So he says, I wanted to see exotic Vietnam, the jewel of Southeast Asia. I wanted to meet interesting and stimulating people of an ancient culture and kill them. I wanted to be the first kid on my block to get a confirmed kill. So in that paragraph, we see his admiration, his interest in Vietnamese culture and people. And then on the other side, we have him wanting to kill and be the killing machine that he's been taught to be. So again, his two sides of that soldierly role and his conflict, his inner conflict, is evident in his answer. All under the guise of humor, though, right? So He's always using his sarcasm or humor as a